Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I'm Hadro in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thanks for joining us. In this week's show, Planned Parenthood stands by the Women's March despite recent reported controversy. We speak with the Miracle Hunter on why the Holy Mother plays an important role in the pro-life movement. And this.
Never, never, never give up. You cannot give up.
As Representative Diane Black ends her time on Capitol Hill, she gives the pro-life movement some powerful advice and tells us what's next for her. But first, Congress puts a spotlight on alternatives to aborted fetal tissue in medical research. In a hearing on Capitol Hill last week, two House Oversight subcommittees held a joint hearing on alternatives to fetal tissue research. Witnesses included two pro-life scientists who shared ethical alternatives and one witness who spoke in favor of the practice. This hearing comes as the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reevaluates funding for research using tissue from aborted babies.
This is a very, very important issue, and I think it is something that we need to constantly be talking about and thinking about because it is at the heart of the life issue.
That was Representative Virginia Foxx of North Carolina, who joins us now from Capitol Hill. Congresswoman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Congresswoman, you said this topic of fetal tissue research is at the heart of the life issue. Can you expand on that?
Well, you know, our Declaration of Independence says our government is here to protect life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. But everything else depends on the right to life. And what has been happening, what we have discovered as a result of investigations and through this hearing, is that there has been an abuse of life in terms of what's been happening with Planned Parenthood and other organizations in terms of using fetal tissues for research and the selling of body parts. And that is not what this country's all about. And it is absolutely imperative that Congress investigate these issues and see what we can do to stop such horrendous practices.
What's your reaction that the National Institutes of Health currently spends over $100 million of taxpayer money for research using the body parts of children derived from elective abortions?
Well, we're going, I believe, in the right direction with NIH in investing a lot of money into research that will not be looking at fetal tissue research, but at alternatives to that, which are very positive and which have resulted in positive actions as a result. So we're seeing cord blood research and other areas where we're doing research, surgical tissues that have been taken in an ethical manner.
Following on that, what would you say to those who claim using fetal tissue in research is necessary for the advancement of medicine?
Well, they have absolutely no proof of that. Not a single cure, not a single treatment has come from the use of fetal tissue research, and just the opposite. We have seen from adult stem cell research, we've seen results, and we've seen nothing from fetal tissue research up until this point.
Congresswoman, finally, as we prepare for a pro-abortion majority in the House of Representatives in the new year, how will you advance a pro-life agenda in a divided Congress?
Well, the members of the Pro-Life Caucus are going to do everything we possibly can to stop any pro-abortion legislation that may come up and to advance, as we have in the past, pro-life legislation. You know, pro-life legislation goes back to a time when Henry Hyde was here and there was a strong Democrat majority, pro-abortion majority. But there were many, many Democrats who agreed with us. Sadly, there aren't very many Democrats who currently have a pro-life position, but we'll continue to do that. And we also know that we have a pro-life president, and we hope that that our very strong pro-life president will use his opportunities through executive orders, as well as we will be asking him to veto legislation that advances a pro-abortion agenda. So we are not intending to take any back steps in this area. We'll continue to press forward on a pro-life position.
Representative Virginia Foxx of North Carolina, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bringing these issues to the people.
For reaction and analysis, we are joined by two pro-life leaders. Marjorie Dannenfelser is president of the Susan B. Anthony List, and joining us via Skype is Kristan Hawkins, president of Students for Life of America. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Marjorie, first question. Democratic members at last week's hearing on fetal tissue research alternatives characterized it as a waste of their time. What's your response to that?
Well, it's just the inversion of reality. Fetal tissue research has proved to be completely unsuccessful after almost 100 years of research. There are no successful treatments, but what are successful are the adult stem cell treatments that are treating cancer, lupus, all kinds of eye diseases, all sorts of things that have led to millions of therapies. It's crazy to think how this adherence to an ideology has affected the mind of some of the most eminent scientists in the country. It was a fantastic hearing that everyone should watch.
And Kristan, that brings me to my next question. The pro-life movement is often painted as anti-science, but can you speak to the scientific reality behind these pro-life alternatives to fetal tissue research?
Well, just like what Marjorie mentioned, there hasn't been any cure that has come because of fetal stem cell research. The cures, the treatments that we're seeing in science across the world today have been coming from adult stem cell research. In fact, my son Gunnar actually participated in a trial where his blood, they were able to derive stem cells just from the vial of his blood. That's going to be the first ever for someone who has cystic fibrosis to have these stem cells. So there's a lot of science going on. There's so many amazing discoveries going on. So exactly what Marjorie's saying, this is a very scary thing that you're seeing where people are just being beholden to their ideology, even when science is proving their ideology isn't working.
And Marjorie, there were two members of the Charlotte Lozier Institute who testified, that is the research and education arm of the Susan B. Anthony List. What kind of insight did they bring to this hearing?
Well, they're eminent scientists, and they gave more detail into what Kristan was just describing and I alluded to, which was these fantastic and beautiful therapies that have occurred and have healed families, healed their diseases, but led to great joy and excitement in the scientific community.
And in related news, the head of the National Institutes for Health, Dr. Francis Collins, told Science Magazine last week that fetal tissue will continue to be the mainstay, saying there is strong evidence that scientific benefits can come from fetal tissue research, which can be done with an ethical framework. Just this week, the U.S. Bishop's Secretary of Pro-Life Activities called these comments, quote, deeply disturbing. Kristan, what's your reaction to that?
Well, if you think about it, and what we've learned recently is that us, you and I, the taxpayers, have been paying for this research. We've been paying Planned Parenthood to give us the broken bodies of babies they've aborted, that they've torn apart for research, to tune about $100 million a year. We know the NIH Director is a President Obama appointee, and what Students for Life called for is we think there needs to be a personnel change at the highest point at NIH.
Marjorie?
Yeah, I mean, the irony to extend this horror is that we, first of all, subsidize the organization that has involved us in this horrible calamity of partnership between scientists and the abortion industry. So we help pay for that. That's on the front end. And then on the back end, we're paying for the research to experiment with the eyeballs, the thymus, the liver of all these children. I mean, truly, truly, it is so gruesome and evil that there is no way we should be participating in this. And by our tax dollars, we are.
Finally, what further action would both of you, as pro-life leaders, like to see be taken by by the Health and Human Services Department regarding fetal tissue research.
Well, I think Kristan said it. If this NIH director, who I spoke to at the beginning of this administration, he's a holdover from the Obama administration, which you might not be surprised about. If he can't uphold the Trump administration's pro-life policy, then he shouldn't be there. I asked him point blank, if the president tells you to abide by pro-life policies, will you do it? And he said, well, of course. I serve at the will of the president. I think that the pro-life movement needs to be insisting, if he can't uphold these policies, he's got to go.
Kristan?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Marjorie are on the same team as well as the rest of the pro-life movement. And that's why we need everyone who watches this show to call the Trump administration, to call HHS, and demand that, the Trump administration's pro-life policies extend to every facet of our U.S. government, including the NIH.
Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, and Kristan Hawkins, president of Students for Life of America. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We commend the Department of Health and Human Services for announcing new grants to pursue ethical alternatives to fetal tissue research. But the fact remains that the National Institutes of Health, which is a part of the HHS department, spends over $100 million of taxpayer money for research using the body parts of children derived from elective abortions. This must come to an end, which brings us to this week's call to action. Pro-lifers, listen up. We need you to go to prolifeweekly.com and sign the letter to call on President Trump to end federal funding of fetal tissue research. Again, you can sign this letter at prolifeweekly.com. The hearts, eyes, livers, and brains being purchased on the taxpayer's dime to be used in laboratory experiments belong to fellow members of the human family. There is no moral or ethical justification for treating these children and their organs like commodities. There are ethical alternatives to this kind of research. Our tax dollars should go to ethical alternatives, not towards research using body parts of unborn children. We as pro-lifers reject the use of federal funds to purchase the body parts of unborn children. Let's make our message known to the Trump administration by calling on President Trump to end the federal funding of fetal tissue research. You can sign the letter to President Trump at prolifeweekly.com. Again, that's prolifeweekly.com. Turning now to our next segment, from the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception to Our Lady of Guadalupe's feast day to Christmas next week. December is filled with reminders about our Blessed Mother's role in our faith. But Mary, our mother, is also a critical part of the pro-life movement. Our next guest is known as the Miracle Hunter. He's a miracle researcher and the man behind the web's top resource on Marian apparitions, miraclehunter.com. Joining us now is the Miracle Hunter himself, Michael O'Neill. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be with you today.
Michael, we wanted to have this discussion because there are a number of special Marian days this month, and our Blessed Mother plays a crucial role in the pro-life movement. Last week, we celebrated Our Lady of Guadalupe, the patroness of the unborn. How did Our Lady gain that title?
Well, Our Lady of Guadalupe has been given many titles by popes throughout the years. The Empress of the Americas, and Pope John Paul II in the year 1999 actually called her the protectress of the unborn. So from that point going forward, people have really embraced her in the pro-life movement.
Can you give us some more background and context about the way of life in Mexico in 1531 when Our Lady appeared, particularly the Aztec lifestyle, and what impact did Our Lady of Guadalupe have at that time?
So it's so interesting because, of course, it was a pagan culture for all those centuries leading to when the Spanish arrived in 1519. And it was a decade or so later when Juan Diego received those visions of the Virgin Mary in 1531, and so many people converted to the Catholic faith as a result. The historian Modo Linea said that somewhere around 9 or 10 million Aztecs converted to Catholicism in the decade after those Guadalupe apparitions. So, yeah, she's had an incredible impact even in today's world.
And I know that we say that Our Lady of Guadalupe, that's a Marian apparition where she is pregnant. How do we know that based on the image we see?
So the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, you can look at her as almost a codex. There are so many hidden symbols and meanings so that a native person who were to look at that would see that she's standing in front of the sun. So she's greater than the sun. She's standing on the moon. So she's greater than the god of the moon. Her hands are folded in prayer. Her head is bowed means she's not divine herself. But when you look at her waist, there's a band around her waist in black. It's a maternity band. So we know that she is the mother of God. And also there is a symbol on her womb, the Nahuli Owen, which is symbolic of the north, south, east, and west, which is to the native person looking at it knows that she is the mother of the one true God.
It's beautiful. And earlier this month, we celebrated the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception. And in this Advent season, we await the birth of Christ from Mary's womb. The womb and the unborn are central to Christ's story, aren't they?
Absolutely. Mary is the Theotokos, the mother of God. And this is the time of year when both in reality and as a metaphor, we need to open our hearts to Christ in our own lives. Just as Advent, we're awaiting his birth, we need to open our own lives and have him be part of it as a birth in our own lives.
This has been so fascinating. And so finally, Michael, what drew you into this unique line of work? Why did you want to commit yourself to researching miracles?
Well, it's so interesting because it actually relates to Our Lady of Guadalupe herself. My mother had a great devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and we had a little miracle story in our family. So we always learned about Our Lady of Guadalupe. And when I went to Stanford and beyond, Our Lady of Guadalupe was my absolute favorite Marian title. And of course, the tilma and that story of miracles are absolutely incredible. So that sort of set me on the path to study miracles as the miracle hunter.
Well, I'm certain when abortion does come to an end, I know our Blessed Mother will be a big reason why. Michael O'Neill, thank you for your work and for joining us today.
Thank you, Catherine.
When we come back.
Oh, there are lots and lots of places that you can be an advocate. You don't have to necessarily be here on Capitol Hill. And I will still continue both as a private citizen and as a nurse.
A pro-life leader gives us a glimpse into her life beyond the steps of Capitol Hill. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. Planned Parenthood is standing by the Women's March, despite a bombshell report detailing anti-Semitic statements reportedly made by Women's March leaders. That's this week's Speak Out segment. An explosive investigative report by Tablet magazine alleges that Women's March co-chairs Carmen Perez and Tamika Mallory made anti-Semitic statements on multiple occasions, including at the group's first meeting. A spokesperson for the group denied the allegations. Other Women's March leaders have also been accused of anti-Semitism. But despite this report of anti-Semitism, Planned Parenthood is standing by the Women's March. A spokesperson for Planned Parenthood said in a statement to the website Refinery29 that the Women's March is a symbol of our collective resistance to the Trump-Pence administration, and that Planned Parenthood stands by their progressive partners. The original Women's March took place the day after President Donald Trump's inauguration, and the group has another Washington, D.C. march scheduled for next month. You may recall the Women's March faced controversy for refusing to allow pro-life groups to participate. Pro-life women were not allowed at the Women's March. So we already know the Women's March has a history of dehumanizing the unborn and a large faction of women. But now we know they have a history of dehumanizing our Jewish brothers and sisters too. Both Planned Parenthood and the Women's March claim to oppose bigotry, yet they allow it to fester within their own ranks. It is yet even more evidence that hate is at the root of the Women's March message, and we need to pray for the conversion of those working at Planned Parenthood to work to win hearts and minds on real human equality. The next Women's March is scheduled to take place in Washington, D.C. the day after the 2019 March for Life. The contrast could not be more stark. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Call on President Trump to end federal funding of fetal tissue research. Sign the letter at prolifeweekly.com. From the steps of the Capitol to her own next steps, a pro-life leader ponders how to advance the pro-life movement beyond Congress. That's this week's Pro-Life Focus.
No one ever should be forced to participate in killing an unborn child.
From introducing the Conscience Protection Act to serving on the congressional panel investigating Planned Parenthood, Republican Tennessee Representative Diane Black has been a leader for the pro-life cause.
Who is protected under the law and who is not, who is given a chance to live and who is denied it.
So what makes her pro-life heart beat?
I think there are two things that make me very pro-life. First of all, I'm a Christian, and I do believe that God created each one of us individually, and when He places us in the womb, that we don't have a right to take away His creation. The second is that I'm a nurse, and so seeing life come into the world, actually having a baby in my hands, I'm not an OB nurse, but I worked in the emergency room, and so I've delivered a few of them and had them come to my hand myself, and there's nothing more precious than that newborn baby.
This registered nurse is also shaped by her role as wife, mother, and grandmother, and her background as a small businesswoman and former educator. Black got her start in politics as a Tennessee state representative, then state senator, before winning the 2010 election to become a U.S. representative.
And those who need the greatest protection are those who have the least voice. That is, children, born and unborn.
Pro-lifers were disappointed when Black, opting to not seek re-election this year, instead ran to become the first female Tennessee governor, and lost. But before she leaves Washington, the Christian congressman sat down with us to look back and forward on her pro-life work.
Looking back at your time as a legislator, from the Tennessee legislature to the U.S. Congress, what are you most proud of when it comes to pro-life legislation?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think at the state level, absolutely the change in the Constitution that restored common sense protections for women that were choosing abortion, to put those back into place so the women that do make that decision would have all the information and hopefully make a decision not to have an abortion. So it took us 14 years to get to that point, and it narrowly passed in the state of Tennessee, but we did change the Constitution in the state. Here at the federal level, I was thinking about this, of which one I would say was most important, and it's probably the restoration of states' ability to be able to decide where their Title X dollars go, because we in the state of Tennessee had passed a bill while I was still in the state of Tennessee that said none of our dollars were going to go to any organization that supported abortion and performed abortions. And so we were able to take our Title X dollars and really truly give it to women's health.
When it comes to the life issue, there's no gray area for Diane Black. She has a 100% pro-life voting record from the National Right to Life and has championed a number of pro-life bills. But she also shares her disappointment that the Conscience Protection Act has yet to become law and that Congress has not completely defunded Planned Parenthood.
As someone who has worked in public policy for 20 years, what advice or insight do you want to give our viewers who might look at what Congress is doing and be frustrated with what they may see as lack of results when it comes to pro-life legislation?
Never, never, never give up. You cannot give up. This is all in God's hands after all, and He just calls us to do His work. And so don't ever give up and say, because I wasn't successful, that it's not something that you will be eventually successful in God's time.
In her newfound freedom, she's calling on her colleagues to get things done.
My advice to them, again, is to just never give up and to continue to talk about this as a life. You know, life begins at conception, and we didn't know that when Roe v. Wade was decided. There was still scientific information that didn't show absolutely life began at conception. And people were told this was just a blob of tissue, and for many years that was believed. But I'm so proud that now that we know that, the younger generation, the millennials, are becoming more and more pro-life because they actually know, with the window into the womb and the scientific information, this is a life. And I get so excited, especially when we have the March for Life, and I stand on the stage and I look all around Washington of the people that are gathering to the stage, and I see so many young people. And how exciting is that we have a generation that's coming after 45 years of that decision, coming to say, no, this is a life.
As she departs D.C., this lawmaker's next steps will be a walk of faith.
Looking forward, do you want to make any news here and share what your next steps will be?
I wish I could tell you. I'm praying about that. I've had several areas that people have said, well, why don't you do this or why don't you do that? And I'm not really sure right at this moment. I'm waiting for God to just say to me, hey, look, this is a direction I want you to look at. But I've still got energy, so we'll see what happens.
And I want to speak more to that. You are a devout Christian, and I think, these past few months probably didn't go as expected. But how do you see God's hand in your life right now?
I know that he has me. He has me in his hand. The Bible tells us he holds us in the palm of his hand, and disappointments come along. That's a part of life. And we have to learn to just turn our eyes and our prayers to God and ask him to heal the wounds, the hurts, and that we know he will do that, and he'll put us in a really good place if we just follow his directions.
A familiar face to Pro-Life Weekly viewers. It doesn't sound like this will be the last we see of her.
How do you plan to continue to be a pro-life advocate beyond the steps of Capitol Hill?
Oh, there are lots and lots of places that you can be an advocate. You don't have to necessarily be here on Capitol Hill. And I will still continue, both as a private citizen and as a nurse, to talk about the importance. I'm a member of several organizations there at the state level. I support our centers that are the centers to help women to make those decisions and to invite them in, and support those efforts to have mobile units that go out in the communities and make sure that those units are there to help women to make those decisions to keep a child and to save a life. And I'm big on adoption. I want to make sure that my husband and I, who support organizations, support adoption, we will continue to do that.
Representative Diane Black of Tennessee, thank you for being a champion for life.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you all do at EWTN to get that message out there.
I am so grateful for Representative Diane Black's leadership. May we all be pro-life trailblazers, whether working in Congress or in our own neighborhood. That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. There won't be a new show next week because of Christmas, but let's stay in touch before the new year. You can email me at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or like my public page on Facebook. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.